even in a fantasy world, when you're writing, it's going to reflect the world that we're in to some degree. The best science fiction and fantasy, to some aspect, is holding up a mirror to something that's going on in our world. And while you may not feature every single aspect of our world in a fantasy world, there has to be something that's familiar. There has to be something that people can connect to. So if they run into too many barriers, too many things that are too strange, they'll fall out of the story. So you have to have some common things. And stories and fantasy has evolved with the times. We look back at some of the early fantasy books and they're probably kind of cringy, and because a lot of female characters don't have as much agency. There were a lot of female writers. Jani Wirtz has talked about this. She's listed dozens that were coming out, but they weren't getting as much attention. But men and women should be able to write the opposite gender and do it well, and do it with respect, and do it with a way that they're not always falling into the same kind of familiar tropes that we've seen, not just in fantasy, but the same kind of 3 or 4 jobs that women in a lot of books, and a lot of TV shows, and a lot of films kind of fell into for many years. And things have moved on now. We want characters with agency from both genders.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 112 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker to my Commander Shepard, my dear MJ Kuhn. How's it going, MJ?
Hello, I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Very, very good today. I'm having a great time. And also, what is a great time? Among Thieves, the Blue Baby, MJ's debut novel. It's just, I got nothing else to say because it's a fucking great time. But also, Thick Ass Thieves is an even juicier great time, the Green Baby. So if you want a double dose of great times, 1 and 2, you got that complete duology.
There you go. And 3, Mushroom Blues. Look at that. Bam. Yep. You can also get Mushrooms book, Adrian's book, Mushroom Blues.
You can get Mushrooms book.
I'll just start calling you Mushroom now.
That was like the most Southern you've ever gotten. Like, go get your mushroom book.
Mushrooms book.
You want some hardcover mushrooms or some paperback mushrooms? We got everything.
There you
for
go.
you.
And ebook mushrooms. Yes,
that was the best plug
get it, friends.
ever, MJ.
Crushed it.
Oh my God. I got mushrooms for you as well. We got a Patreon, the official SFF Addicts Patreon, and merch store live. So check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now, joining us once again is the amazing Stephen Aryan, author of The Coward, The Warrior, The Judas Blossom, and more, including the newly released The Blood Dim Tide. Welcome back, Stephen. How's it going?
Good. I'm good. I'm ready, but nervous for this, but we'll see how we get on.
You're in good company. Don't worry about it.
We're pretty scary.
We're going to destroy you.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
All right. A heads up. This is part 2 of our 2-part chat with Stephen, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know him better. Today, though, it's a battle of the sexes as we talk about writing the opposite gender. But this ain't a battle because we're going to be spreading love between the genders as we pick apart this dense topic. You know, we're not about combat here. We're all about love and connection. So
you went so
Not
Canadian
learning.
You went so
all about
Canadian
love,
there. We're not about war. We're about peace. We're a boat.
Adrian is just leaning into his Canadian roots, and I'm leaning into Southern American roots that I do not have. Perfect.
No dude about it.
Sure.
Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. 4 titans sleep beneath the earth. Only one fae can keep them from waking. Silbury is an orphaned wood nymph, taken from her forest home and raised in the corrupt city of Pendurin. The Fae child grows up unaware of who she is, what she can do, and the calling of her kind. Under the control of a cruel guildmaster, Silbury is trained as an assassin. As an adult, she escapes her violent past to start a new life and a family. But a tragic death brings her back to the familiar cobbled streets to seek revenge. This dark path leads Silbury to uncover an even darker secret. An ancient evil will wake the Titans and break the world. Silbury must travel with her daughter across a war-torn land to defeat that evil. What begins as a fairy tale transforms into a sweeping, multi-generational epic about love and loss, and a woman with a strange connection to nature. The Dryad's Crown by David Hopkins is a powerful and emotional debut fantasy novel. The Dryad's Crown is available now in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Visit dryadscrown.com to purchase the book from your favorite online retailer. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. To kick off this masterclass, Stephen, why is it important for authors to write outside of their own gender, but also to do so with thoughtfulness?
Even in a fantasy world, when you're writing, it's going to reflect the world that we're in to some degree. The best science fiction and fantasy, to some aspect, is holding up a mirror to something that's going on in our world. And while you may not feature every single aspect of our world in a fantasy world, there has to be something that's familiar. There has to be something that people can connect to. So if they run into too many barriers, too many things that are too strange, they'll fall out of the story. So you have to have some common things. And stories and fantasy has evolved with the times. We look back at some of the early fantasy books and they're probably kind of cringy, and because a lot of female characters don't have as much agency. There were a lot of female writers. Janie Wirtz has talked about this. She's listed dozens that were coming out, but they weren't getting as much attention. But men and women should be able to write the opposite gender and do it well, and do it with respect, and do it with a way that they're not always falling into the same kind of familiar tropes that we've seen, not just in fantasy, but the same kind of 3 or 4 jobs that women in a lot of books, and a lot of TV shows, and a lot of films kind of fell into for many years. And things have moved on now. We want characters with agency from both genders. So it behooves, the writer needs to do the homework, they need to pay attention, and they really need to think about it very, very carefully. Because if you only write about yourself all the time, or characters like who you are, it's going to be really boring stories. So it's just essential, I think, of any novel, fantasy or sci-fi or anything really. You've got to do it.
Yeah, and I also think it's equally important for readers to read outside of their own gender, especially now when there's such a plethora of authors from different backgrounds, different genders. But for you, I want to ask this to both you and MJ. Is there a specific female character in fiction who you absolutely adore?
Go on, MJ, I'll have a think while you...
Yeah. So am I listing a female one? Because the script
Such
says
a gentleman, just dump it on him.
Yeah, right. Ladies first.
Ladies first.
Yeah.
Ladies first.
I mean, a ton of them. But I mean, in the script, you said for me to list a male character, but I think that's a cheat, because when I was looking at it, I was like, of course I can list male characters because that's...
No, but it's the opposite gender. So who's a male character that you really connect with?
Oh, okay, yeah. And Calcressia. I love Calcressia. I do love Calcressia a lot. Also, Clay Cooper from Kings of the Wild.
Kings of the Wild.
I very much love Clay Cooper. And Glokta. His hatred of stairs.
Yeah.
So relatable.
Oh yeah. That's just like getting into MJ's like twisted side. I love Glokta.
Well, when I was first reading that series, the first lot, I like actually texted a friend that had read it, and I was like, am I supposed to like Glokta? Because I like really do. Like, is something wrong with me? And they were like, no, you're good. You're supposed to like Glokta. Like,
Stephen,
right.
Have you thought of anyone?
A lot of mine kind of come from like TV and film. There's lots in books too, but
yeah,
like I've got a list of all of the ones from TV and film over the years and growing up. So like Trinity in the Matrix film, and Lilu and Starbuck and President Laura Roslin from Battlestar Galactica. And just those two, particularly Laura Roslin, such a fascinating character and so laid and played by the wonderful actress Mary McDonnell. And she did such a wonderful performance from where the character starts to where it ends up. The transformation, it's just spectacular. Things like, Buffy and Sydney Bristow from Alias that I watched, and Princess Leia going right back to the beginning, from when I was a kid, and A New Hope came out. So having strong and interesting and layered, complex female characters, I think, or Ripley, as and Sarah Connor.
Mm-hmm.
In the first film in particular, because in the second film, she's a badass and she's tough as nails and she's got the military training and she's lean. But in that first book, she's just an ordinary woman that destroys this killing machine because of who she is, the spirit of within her and her potential. That's what's so important, that they don't have to be a massive henchwoman that comes in and is always the strongest, because that's kind of dull and it just doesn't interest me in any way.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's why Essen from the Broken Earth trilogy, I really connected with her. Obviously, she's like the main POV character, and you get her from like different sort of perspectives at different points in her life. But also, it's like she's a mother, she's broken, haha. But she's also just very. She's also very like she has a very dry sense of humor, and it's just like the kind of female character that you don't really see all that often, like a really jaded mom who's just dealt with some shit and she's just going through middle age, just like, fuck, like this world sucks. Life has been rough as hell. But there are so many things that you can relate to on top of that. It's like, it doesn't have to be so simplistic. Like the female characters can be really complex. Like in fantasy, doesn't have to be like, oh, she's like the waitress or the bartender or the whore or like all these fucking
wives and mothers, victims and whores. I tend to be the kind of primitive early stuff that we saw a lot of.
Yeah. So there's just a lot more complexity there. Even though, some of those stereotypes are still, those typecastings are still there. But
yeah, well, let's address that a little bit, because it's like the elephant in the room a little bit, and probably why you said you're nervous to talk about this subject at the beginning of the episode. You have no need to be nervous, because you do it super well writing, which is why we're talking to you about it. Or your female characters are, shocker, they're like real people. It's great. But let's address the elephant in the room. Men infamously writing women horribly, right? There's a whole Reddit thread for like, I forget what it's called, but something like "Stop Men from Writing Women" or something. And it's just people taking.
Send that to me. I'll put that in the description. Screenshots.
I can't remember. I'll find it. I can't remember exactly what it's called. The listeners are probably like, "It's this,"
but just like tons of cringy shit.
Oh yeah, it's just screen grabs of like the cringiest stuff. So, what are some of the cringiest things that you've witnessed in fiction? So like, what are some things that you strive not to do when you are portraying outside of your own gender in fiction?
Well, fridging is one thing that I hate, that I don't want to, ever see. That's where Gail Simone came up with the term, but she used that because of something that she'd seen in a comic, but it's existed for a long time, is where a female character is killed or injured or maimed in some way in order to motivate the male character to go and do something. That kind of stuff I just hate, because it just takes away any kind of agency for those characters, and it puts them into one of those roles that we talked about earlier, like victims, whores, wives, and mothers. So I never want to do anything like that. It doesn't mean that you can't have bad things happen to male or female characters, but there needs to be a reason beyond motivating someone else to go out and seek revenge. That's something that does it happen very often these days, or is it now become a thing that so many people are aware of it? I'm hoping it's in the back of their mind.
But think about it. It's like if you were living like 800 years ago, someone came into your village, maybe a Mongol came into your village and killed your mother, your gentle, peaceful Persian village, a Mongol came in, killed your mother. Mm-hmm. You'd be like, well, I'm going to go get fucking revenge on that Mongol for killing my mom. Maybe back in those days, it was that cookie cutter. No, I feel like
it's one of those things. No, but it's because there is space for it.
I'm completely joking. But obviously,
you're devil's advocating. But I think there is space for things like that to happen. It's just when it's I think it's particularly egregious when it's like the only female characters exist to provide motivation to the male characters. I think that's when it's quite egregious, but yeah.
For me, like what bothers me the most is seeing female characters in a story only existing for the purpose of being like a love interest or fueling like some sort of romantic element. You know, it's like that is probably why I don't vibe that much with romance fiction, even though it's not that simplistic nowadays, especially where characters have become more complex and authors are thinking more about that kind of stuff. But I just really hate it when it's like this person's existence is just to be a romantic foil for the male.
See, I feel like the romance fiction that I've read is more on the other side, right? Because a lot of it is written by women, and the female characters often
so there's
take
the
center
subversion.
stage.
There's the subversion, MJ.
So I mean, at least in like modern romantasy and stuff, it's not necessarily like fully my cup of tea, but I've read a bit of it, and it's, you know, a lot of centering the female experience and, you know, female sexuality and stuff even, which I think is a nice flip on that particular
Then we just throw like some 6-packs and a pecs on the cover and we're all good.
Right? Yeah. An immortal man with abs of steel.
Exactly.
We're good to go.
And a sword.
Or just like a sexy pirate with his shirt unbuttoned. That's all we need, man.
There we go.
But I do think like I would actually really like to hear like any listeners like comment on YouTube or Twitter, wherever you see this, with some of your pet peeves, because I do think it is like something that as writers, we might be more conscious about these things that we don't like to see. But from the reader perspective, sometimes you don't really fully understand what it is that annoys you about something until you sort of think about it a little bit more. Like it took me a long time as a reader to become as sort of attuned and aware of the things that really bother me about certain stories. And then becoming a writer where I'm like, oh yeah, I can like pinpoint exactly what that thing is. And I am going to avoid it at all costs, or to approach it in a more nuanced way where I can, you know, create more complexity or subvert the thing that annoyed me, the trope, whatever it may be. But
the other thing I hate is when they take a writer, TV in particular, take a lot of what they think are male traits, male aspects, and they transplant them onto a female character, and they create the veneer of strength because they believe that's what a strong female character, I hate that term, but that's what they think it means, and that's what they think people want to see, and it isn't. What they want to see is female characters with agency that have their own destiny, that have their own story. They're not subject to the whims of someone else's story. But it doesn't mean they have to be a henchwoman. It doesn't mean you can't have physically strong women. So in the Carrot, the Bronwyn is a physically intimidating female character, but that isn't all she is. She still has emotions. She still has weakness. She still has moments where she has doubt as part of being a human being. Whereas I'm going to nail my flag to the mast here. If you look at Rings of Power in Galadriel, I hate that character. I despise them because they've taken all of the male traits and said, right, she's always the best, she's always the strongest, she's always right. And then you actually study the character and you realize as a child, she was traumatized and bullied, and she grew up to be a self-righteous narcissist who always thinks she's right and bullies her way through king, queen, elf, dwarf, it doesn't matter. She ostracizes herself from her friends. No one likes her because she's awful and just so bullheaded. And again, it's a difference. We talked about nuance between someone being driven and someone being so blinded that they can't see what's going on. So it's that thing of just transplanting things over and saying, right, I want to make this male character more feminine, so I'm going to make him really emotional and really weak and physically not intimidating. Hang on, that saying those things doesn't make him a male version character. It's people don't understand that, yes, there are vast differences between men and women, but it's a spectrum across every genre and every kind of, you get men who are emotional and women who aren't, but just transplanting aspects to say, right, this will now give us a strong female character. It's nonsense. It's just not true.
Right. And especially like when it comes to things that like fantasy or science fiction that involves combat, you know, oh, we're going to do a story about like Galadriel's past. Obviously, we have to make her a warrior and make her kind of fit that preconceived mold. But then I look at a character like Bobby from The Expanse.
Yes.
She's a soldier.
She's a
but
Marine.
She has so much nuance.
Yes.
You know, she's like a Martian Marine, but she has so much nuance in terms of her ambitions, in terms of her relationships, in terms of her emotional spectrum,
Yeah.
in terms of her displays of strength, but also her displays of weakness and the way that she approaches winning and failure, all this kind of stuff. That is like how I see you can make a strong female character who actually embodies the nuance and sort of like vast spectrum that an individual human can embody. You know, you don't have to be so fucking cookie cutter about this kind of stuff.
And
You
then,
don't have to be.
Drummer's the same. She's not huge and big and strong, but she's an incredibly powerful character. Christian Avasarala in The Expanse, played by Sherry Agdashlu, one of my favorite characters ever. And she never fights, she never punches anybody, but she's so clever and she's so driven and she's so good at manipulating people in order to get what she wants. That makes her so dangerous. And she's just a fascinating character. She's one of the best ones in the show and the books because she's so relentless. But you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, she's a strong female character, because that phrase has come to mean, it just doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
It's giving
kind of like
characters.
It's kind of like the dissolution of a term like morally gray character. It's kind of like these terms are starting to become meaningless. Why? Because I don't know, maybe publishers decided to use them as marketing terms and that doesn't work for a very long time. And eventually people get tired of that shit. So figure out new ways to market books. Thank you. So you've mentioned
very specific. That was.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of your characters,
Bronwyn. Yeah.
Why do you enjoy writing female characters in general? But can you share another example of a female character you've written that you feel particularly proud of and why they stand out?
Monroe from Blood Mage, and then in the second trilogy, she is someone who is quite damaged. She's quite broken, but she swears a lot. She fights. She's grumpy. She hates people in general. She drinks far too much. But she's like people I've met. She's like people I know. And, you know, you take aspects from other people and blend it together. But she's a real person because she's imperfectly perfect. You know, she doesn't always win every fight. She's not physically intimidating. She's quite small and petite, but she's dangerous. She's incredibly dangerous. So I'm really happy with that character. So I wrote about her in Blood Mage, and I thought, yeah, her story's not done. I want to spend more time with this character. I like this character. And so I brought her back in the second trilogy and she became one of the main characters because I wanted to spend more time with her because I think I'd done quite a good job and people seem to really like her. So that's another character that I'm really proud of.
I think it's a telling thing when you as a writer, A, feel that character's story is not told, and B, you want to spend more time with them.
Yeah.
Then that's like, oh, that is a character that you've created that you really, really connect with. And MJ, I wanted to ask you why you enjoy writing male characters and if you have a particular one that you're proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, again, this conversation feels a little bit sillier from the other side. I mean, I'm happy to weigh in. But
why does it feel silly, though?
Because yes, I know I experience life through the lens of a non-male person. But as a non-male person, and living in a patriarchal society, I experience life through the lens of the male gaze all the time anyways. So I feel like writing male characters for me is way easier than writing female characters for a man must be. Like, it must be harder because you are not every day having the male experience or the female experience jammed down your eye holes and your ear holes like I am anytime I experience media.
Yeah,
you know,
I was like, yeah, please don't say throat.
I wasn't gonna, because I was like, that's a little bit too on the nose, a little bit. But you know, I do enjoy writing male characters so that I can, I don't know. I think that it goes to what Stephen was saying in the beginning. You can't just write your own experience. Like, people say, write what you know, and that's great advice for in ways. But you have to stretch. You have to write outside your own personal lens of experience, or else you won't have a story that makes any sense. Like there's going to be a variety of genders and gender expressions in the world, and probably in most fictional worlds if they're created well. And so, yeah, you just kind of, you have to lean into it a little bit. So it feels like cheating for me to answer, because it's like, well, it's just,
Well, yeah,
It's not cheating though, but that's your perspective, so it's not.
Yeah,
cheating.
well, because it's like every book I read as a child was 99% of them, the main characters were male. You know what I mean? And I feel like young boy readers don't have that same experience of reading 99% of books with young female main characters. And thankfully nowadays there's a heck of a lot more books with young female main characters too, for everyone to read. But like back in the day, because we're old, like it wasn't as true. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I feel like that has me a leg up writing genders outside of my own, right? A little bit. I don't know.
You mentioned, the kind of elephant in the room. So we're fantasy writers, so we have advantages that other genres don't. So you kind of mentioned it, your lived in experience. If I was writing a crime novel set in 2024 and the main character is a woman, I can only get it up to a certain point. My accuracy level, my attention to detail, the research, conversations I have with as many women as I can, as many women beta readers as I can, I will only get that female character up to a certain level of accuracy. And most people will read it and go, yeah, it's okay. Some women will read the book who've not been involved in the editing process and will be like, yeah, it's fine, he's done a good job. Because I don't have your lived in experience of the 21st century of being a woman. And vice versa. There's some aspects of male society that we don't talk about, pressures, and that's a massive, complicated topic. But when it comes to fantasy, we have an advantage, because everything that we talk about in our world and complain about and bitch about, struggles with gender and society and patriarchy and all those kind of things. If you're creating a fantasy world and it's not set on Earth, why on earth would you limit it to the rules that exist within our world? Why would you build a society based upon the same foundation? If you've got orcs and dragons and zombies and whatever else, why would it have developed in the same way to Earth on any degree? So the idea of you don't need to, so in my books, I've been writing queer characters since 2000, my first book since 2015. It's not in any of the PR. It's not on the back anywhere, because it's not branded as that. It's not about that. The fact that some of the characters happen to be queer is just by the by, because in this world, that's not the thing I'm talking about. That isn't the story. It's one aspect of a particular character. And it's the same with women. Some of them do these jobs, some of them do these other kinds of jobs. Whereas if you come back to our world, you say, right, because of the way things have happened and because of, when the men went off to war during World War II, a lot of the women were working behind. So they were then working in the factories and things like that. And then women got the vote in this century and then this decade and, voting things and equal opportunities, and the pill changed society and all this kind of stuff. And women can go back to work and, all this kind of stuff, maternity pay. If you're God in your fantasy world, why on earth would you limit it in any way to that kind of thing?
Preach.
So it doesn't make any sense. Like if you're building your fantasy world well, like I said, you've got your iceberg and you only got the 10% in the story. You build all the other things behind and you just start layering it up and thinking about it carefully. So if you've got one country that's 9 out of 10 births are women, it's not sexist to say, well, most of the people in that country, in that fantasy world, women will do most of the jobs because they have to function as a society. It's not reflecting, it's not saying, oh, it's sexist or you're trying to push a feminist agenda or something. It's like, hang on, if you have that in that country, in that world, that's how it would have to function.
Right,
you can
do some collapse.
Yeah. We're only going to let 10% of the population do the work.
Like, you know what I mean? It would collapse and it wouldn't exist. So you can you can play with different aspects. You can play with different things and talk about things in an interesting way. You had Christopher Buehlman on not long ago, and he had goblins, and he said, right, yeah, but goblins are a bit weird. I want to do something different with them. And he skewed them in such a way that you've never seen before. Jonathan French, in his Bastard series, has centaurs and he has halflings. And I've never thought that halflings, hobbits, were creepy and weird. he creates them into these weird, disturbing, ground-dwelling, underground, kind of ant-hill, creepy little dudes that know magic, and they're disturbing. Centaurs are these bloodthirsty monsters that when the blood moon comes up, they rampage or just want to fight and fuck everything. I've never seen a centaur like that before in my life. And why would you start with what people have done before? Why wouldn't you do something different? And it's the same with gender. It's like, don't start from the foundation of our world. Build your own and create whatever you want in whatever capacity you want. And because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's why I appreciate authors like Adrian Tchaikovsky, because he's approaching world building from such a multifaceted kind of foundation, where it's like, yeah, he's writing about spiders and Children of Time, but how is he approaching spider society, arachnid society, in terms of how they reproduce, in terms of, we were talking last episode about epigenetic memory, how the memory passes on, how like one spider basically is like multiple iterations just based on how spider biology works, how spider gender works in terms of how they are as a species. It's like he spends so much time thinking about those kinds of things. Or like in his Final Architecture series, there's this race called the Essil, which are these like weird fucked up like demigod clams pretty much. Like they're so weird, but he's thinking about all these different things in terms of like not only how, and this goes for all authors, you don't have to restrict world building to just the world. You can go as deep as the biology of the creatures that you create, the creatures that you write. You can look at creatures that already exist, like Stephen said about centaurs or halflings or what have you, and manipulate people's perception of what those creatures are for the betterment of your story. You don't have to restrict yourself to that kind of stuff. And I think research is one of those things, like we were talking about research last episode in terms of how you approached the Judas Blossom and the Blood Dim Tide. But like research, I think, is something that you can do to not only better understand the lived experiences and perspectives of other genders, but at the same time, researching the strange ways in which outside of the human realm, gender, how it exists, how biology functions from species to species. So I think like there are so many ways that you can approach this without pigeonholing yourself to what what you're familiar with. Because like you said, Stephen, when you are an author, you are a god.
Yep.
Don't get all egotistical about that shit. You are a god in the context of your story. So
Dan's puppet stands for me.
Dan's little character. Oh my god, this is getting macabre. So Stephen, I wanted to ask you about research. Like for you, when it comes to this kind of thing, when it comes to lived experiences, when it comes to looking into other aspects of biology and how the natural world functions, how do you handle that? How do you conduct your research in order to better your story, better your process, not get too bogged down in things, but also to try and avoid cliches and things like that that can so easily crop up during the writing process, especially if you're a pantser. Sorry.
I feel like that was a dig at someone, but
I'm digging against the publishing industry and pantsers.
Adrian's feeling spicy today.
I am so spicy.
Get your shovel, man. You got a dollar digging today.
Get your daily dose of mushrooms.
We're back there again.
We're back there.
It's like you said, if you've got something that exists, it's how can you do something different or interesting with it? Like one of the most common story models in fantasy is the farm boy goes on an adventure and becomes a great hero. That isn't to say you can't do that story, but how do you do it and make it fresh and different and interesting? How do you keep, if you love that trope and there's 500 versions that, why would you do something that's exactly the same again? Why would someone pick it up? So you can start with something familiar and then twist it. So I'll spoil something slightly from The Coward. There's a character and a race in there called Alfea. Alfea is a High German word for elf. But the characters in the book look nothing like the elves you'd think of from Tolkien. They go back, because Tad Williams did this too. When he wrote Memory, Sorrow and Thorn, he looked at what Tolkien had done and said, these are all the aspects that Tolkien's pulling on for various kind of races and creatures and things. But there's all this other kind of stuff that he hasn't touched. So when he created his race, the Scythi and all the other ones, and the Dvalga, the dwarf kind of race, they're nothing like the dwarves and the elves and the non-humanoid races that we've seen in Tolkien that people think of as elves because that's what they've grown up with since, like the 60s and 70s. So when I built the Althea, I thought, right, I want something that feels purely and totally not human. The way she walks, the way she stands, the way she moves, the way she talks, even the way she thinks. When there's a lot of time Kel will say something, she just stares at him and he doesn't know if she understood him because she doesn't come from the same foundation. It's not like they're both evolved from the same tree and split off thousands and millions of years ago. They didn't. They came from somewhere completely different.
Right. So and even something like communication is rooted in biology, but also like passed on genetically, culturally, socially, all these.
So if you have something that doesn't connect you, how do you communicate with it? How do you find common ground? How do you find something that... So I think at the beginning of the book, when Kel meets her, she's staring at him and he's like, I don't know whether she wants to fight me or fuck me or eat me. I don't know. Because looking in her eyes, I don't see anything familiar because she's not human. And it's only through the course of the book that he starts to understand how she thinks, but it takes him a long time by spending a lot of time with her. Whereas others who are a bit more on the outside, like, she's so weird. And he's like, well, she is, but equally, I kind of get her now because I've spent time with her and I've begun to learn it and she's learning about me. And it's so I prefer when someone does that, like Christopher Buehlman or Jonathan French. They take something and give it an interesting twist and just reinvent it slightly. And I think that's really important for fantasy. We kind of deviated from gender, but it kind of feeds into it.
No, but it's like something as simple as, okay, so it's not the most simple thing. Like, say Stephen jets off to Germany or something like that. Even Germany, compared to your upbringing in England, there's so much there that is different in terms of sort of like speech patterns and social norms and all these kinds of things. And I do think like a lot of what makes gender and the experiences of particular genders really noticeable are the norms, the things that are normalized behaviors, things that are ingrained throughout childhood. Sort of like I've been experiencing this with my son where it's like, so like he's 3.5 coming up on 4. He's in sort of like a preschool kind of thing. And so many of the teachers, they approach the little girls and they say, mi princesa, mi princesa. It's like, my princess. And I'm like, okay, even from this age, just like the repetition of something like, you're my little princess, you're my little princess, that stuff just gets into your fucking head for like forever, and it already starts to imbue the sense of your own identity kind of thing. And MJ, I wanted to toss this to you first in terms of how you handle writing about the experiences unique to the opposite gender, whether it's like biological, like something like, I don't know, just like a guy like gets kicked in the balls or something like that, or stuff like what I was talking about, the things that are socially ingrained in you, whether it's your family or just like your environment and that kind of stuff. There's like a swath of things that kind of come into that experiential sort of perspective.
Yeah. So I think I've had kind of an easy time of it so far because everything that all the 2 books I have published are in a world that I created. So to Stephen's earlier point, like I kind of got to pick what social norms were and were not present. I made the society fairly egalitarian, less so in some of the kingdoms, more so in some of the kingdoms. But, I didn't have to give all the characters the same cultural baggage that we have in our world, though I'm sure I accidentally imparted some just because I'm the author and I have some cultural baggage, right? My current project that I'm writing right now is actually set in a contemporary setting, though, for part of the book at least. And it does have a male main character. So I've done a lot of, I've read a lot of books that are first person male POVs written by men recently to try to get in some of that experience, but also I have 2 male beta readers reading it right now. One of them is sitting on this podcast. His name is Stephen.
Hello.
But yeah, so
I am the
that's
man.
right. Like it's me. But so that's a piece of it too, right? Because there is going to be some stuff that I'm certain that there will be some passages that you or my other beta reader will read through and be like, this sounds like a lady wrote it, right? And I think it's important to bring those readers in to, kind of give you that perspective and call you out on the stuff so that you can, because to your points earlier, there are, yes, I think it's easier if I had to pick, like for a woman to write a male convincingly just because blah, 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 patriarchy, blah, 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 revisiting. But there are parts of the male experience, obviously, that I am not privy to because I have never lived as a man, So, yeah.
Yeah, because I was really, really thankful. Like beta readers is actually, it doesn't have to be just a beta reader. It can be like a sensitivity reader. It can be, even like an alpha reader if you want to just like get them in real early kind of thing. I was so happy to have you and Crystal helping out with Mushroom Blues because it's like, yeah, my main character is like a middle-aged woman, and she does like embody male traits in certain ways in terms of we were talking earlier about like the strong female character and that kind of thing. It's like she is strong in certain ways. She's very strong-headed.
She's well-rounded. Yeah, she's got her flaws.
Like, exactly. She has her flaws and everything like that. And I pulled some stuff from my own experience, but I also kind of like pulled stuff from research and imagined experience. I actually talked to my mom a lot about like what middle age was like.
Yeah, I would say that's one thing. I am so youthful. Yeah. I couldn't help you there.
Yeah. You know what? Like someone on YouTube, it's like, I normally don't read the comments, but if they're like overtly negative, I'll just skip over it. But there's one comment on Daniel Green video that was like, this is like such a mischaracterization of middle age, like her like aching knees and stuff like that. And I'm like, yo, man, I talked to my mom and she said achy knees since she was like 35.
I was going to say, I'm 32 and I got achy knees, bitch. All right.
Yeah.
Some of us just have the ache.
Yeah. It's like, that's what happens when you have 4 kids, man. You have achy fucking knees. But I think it's really, really helpful to have people around you, like if you're married to someone of the opposite gender, you can always ask them about like their experiences and stuff like that. To have beta readers who are really helpful. You and Crystal gave some good feedback about, the female experience and everything like that.
Just the little details, right?
Yeah,
that is just
exactly.
Like I think a lot of the think about it. Yeah.
A lot of the time it's just like little details like that. And Stephen, for you, like, how do you handle writing experiences that are unique to females? MJ put pregnancy periods in there.
I'm thinking I have seen really good portrayals of pregnancy and periods from
really
male writers, and I have seen like really bad ones, right? And I can't even imagine trying to write something like that. I can't even think about writing pregnancy. I've never been pregnant, right? But you get it. Whatever.
Oh my god. See, it's even an imagined experience for MJ too. So
right? Yeah, none of us can speak on pregnancy, basically.
Horrifying, terrifying. I think like you, Adrian and MJ, I think about all the people in my life that I've known who've women at different ages. So whether it was my grandmother or my great aunt who, when I was very little, she was already in her 50s. So by the time I was, 30, she was 80 by that point. So I kind of had her for my entire life as someone who's much, much older. And then school teachers, very influential to me and very important. The best school teachers have been very important for building my foundation. And the authors, whether it's Ursula Le Guin writing a male character, she's still someone, or Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, who until I was 21 thought were 2 women, because over here Tracy's only a woman's name. Turns out Tracy's a man, but who knew? But
Or like Robin Hobb, people always misgender her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a dude. So there's always been women in my life at different ages that have been important and influenced me, and have been incredibly just. I'm constantly studying them, watching them, and just memories, kind of collate over the years. And if I don't know, I go and ask as many women as I can about a certain thing. I go and talk to them. Like I said, I'm never going to get it completely right, but I will do my best, my absolute best. And as you say, it's the little details that you can put in to say, is this kind of right? Does this feel right? Would you say something like this? Would you feel this kind of thing? Because men and women do think very, very differently, whether it's dealing with emotions. We're terrible at dealing with our emotions, Women share a lot more stuff than a group of men do. If you get a bunch of guys together, it's changed a little bit, but predominantly, a bunch of men will not sit around and be like, oh, right, I need to kind of talk about my girlfriend. Oh, let's all help John. Yeah, come on, John, what's happening with your girl? It doesn't happen. It's still a kind of very butch, masculine, stereotypical thing. That's still a lot in modern society. That's still very much there. But a group of women will talk about everything. Having worked in an office with 7 women for 4 years, the conversations I heard in a public space.
That was Stephen's research.
Right. He's just like through osmosis.
After a while, they kind of forgot that I was there because I'd be busy writing away, and they'd be like, oh, sorry, Stephen. I'd be like,
you'd be like, oh, I wasn't even listening.
8 hours later, I get home.
Yeah.
Do you need a drink?
You got fucking lockjaw from everything you hear.
Yeah, I learn a lot indirectly sometimes, but it's those conversations that we're not in the room, we don't hear them, we don't know them, and you're not going to find out. So write the thing, talk to women, ask them the question, get them to read it. It's so important, especially if you're trying to write about something that's very particular to women and their body. Like, my God, I've got no clue. So let's not even pretend that I'm going to get it right. Get someone to help me work on it, please, for God's sake.
Oh my God.
I will say there are no scenes where my main character gets kicked in the balls, Stephen, so you won't have to
okay
on that
one. I won't have to tweak that for you, yeah.
I just cut that out.
Yeah. Fair
it's not a fun experience.
I wouldn't imagine so. From what I've heard, it sounds awful.
I mean, I wouldn't imagine getting kicked in the vagina is even remotely fun. So,
also not fun, but we can't really compare.
Well, speaking of dangerous, MJ, I'll let you take the lead on this next question.
Is it the controversial one that we were going to bring up? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. We haven't got to the controversial one yet? Okay, here we go.
Well, it's just, it's a topic that comes up often it comes up often in fiction in general. It comes up, unfortunately, often in reality. But I feel like especially in science fiction and fantasy it does, and that's the topic of sexual assault portrayals in fiction. And most often the victims in these crimes in reality too, but also in fiction, not all of the victims, of course, but the majority are women. So, let's talk about it. How can or should this topic be explored in fiction? What are things to avoid? How can a writer determine whether or not they are the right person to tell a story featuring this, right? Like just, kind of a freewheeling conversation on this very heavy topic.
I need a drink.
Hey, it's drink o'clock for you, right? It's late enough.
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Go for it.
It goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, if you're using the injury to a woman in any kind of capacity, physical, sexual, in order to motivate the male character, you need to go back and look at it really, really carefully and think, is this the only way to do this? Do you have to do it? Is it vital to the plot? It's not that you can't have something like that, but the reasons to include it have changed, I think. Storytelling has evolved. We're talking about stories in the 60s compared to now. Some science fiction I go back and read, it holds up really, really well. Some of it you go back and read, and it's really clunky, really awkward, and by modern standards, it's kind of simple or ridiculous or weird. So in the 60s, you know, the sexual awakening and all kind of changes. 60 years on, things have changed a lot, and that kind of a book now wouldn't have the same kind of impact. That doesn't mean you have to turn the dial up to 11 like Spinal Tap in order to generate the same kind of feeling. It's like, should you be exploring it? What do you hope to gain by exploring this kind of topic? What is it you're trying to say by pushing into something like sexual assault? So there again, it's not just a case of you can't do it. It's like, why are you doing it? What's the reason behind the thing in the book? But then again, you get into the aspect of whose point of view is it from? And then that becomes even more complicated. If it's a man writing as the female character and it's first person, that's not something I'd want to tackle really without a lot of support and a lot of help from women. But there again, I'm thinking, does it need to be there, and why is it there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think the other thing that I see often, yes, oftentimes that's used as motivation for a male character, which is one of the cardinal sins of using it. But another one of the cardinal sins that I see is when it's used as like a character development accelerator for the victim of the crime, right? I think probably one of the most egregious examples of this is in recent times, because there are many, but is Sansa Stark in Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, we need to make her strong. What should we do? Right? And that kind of, in the show, rather.
Yeah, like the show definitely
added to the show that
with much less
was not her in the books.
Tact.
But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's okay because it made her strong is kind of how it reads when that's what it's used for, which I know is, I'm certain, not the intent for a lot of these writers when they are using it in that way. But I think it goes back to what you said, Stephen, is just take a look at it and say, okay, why am I using this? Is this, does this need to be here? I think another reason why when people put it in fantasy, especially, is when it's the society is full of this particular phenomenon. And it's like, well, that's how it was back then. It's like, back when? You created this fucking world. Like,
you're the god.
You're God.
Yeah,
Why are you
exactly.
starting from the same
Just because
foundation?
the Mongols definitely raped a lot of people doesn't mean Stephen filled his books with,
and
the Judas
that's the
Blossom.
thing where it's like, if it is historical fantasy, I can see that being a legitimate argument. But when you're just straight up writing second world fantasy, it's like, okay, you're basing it off of a medieval society. And yes, if you're doing like a larger commentary on blah, 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 and you need to have these same gender dynamics and whatever, it's not a wholesale, no one should touch this topic, no one should do it. But I think it does take a careful, just take a look at it and say, why am I including this? What is this serving for the story? That's my 2 cents on this very complicated topic.
Yeah. And I think intent is a huge part of it, but not just for this. I think it's like when you're approaching so much stuff from the perspective of the opposite gender, it's like, what is your intent in including any aspect of this character? If you decide you want to make a female character a whore, it's like, okay, but why? What is the purpose of, like I've been rewatching Warrior, the sort of like martial arts TV series. And there are many characters in that show that are whores. They're working at whorehouses. There's like, the madams and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's a bit like, side characters that aren't given much development, but then certain characters where it's very intentional why they're put into this position, what the power dynamics are there, and the sort of development that the creators have in mind for like what this character is going to be able to achieve, where they're going to go, giving more complexity to a character, even though they are typecast into what Stephen earlier called like the four, basically the four main types of female characters. It's like,
well, I think that's a good point too, though. It's like you're going to have some side characters of all genders that you can't build a fully fleshed out character for.
Right.
Because they're in 2 scenes. And yes, in this one scene, they're serving ale to the, you know what I mean? It's like I think that's the thing too, where it's like, it's, whatever. People are not always going to be fully fleshed out.
Have you seen the new Shogun series?
Yep.
I haven't yet, but I've been meaning to. I've heard it's incredible.
It's not really a spoiler. There are some characters in it that have tea houses, as they call it there, which is essentially you go and a man would go and visit the tea house, a brothel, essentially. But some of the characters in there, even within the way society is structured, they have power because there's the madam who runs it that comes to see Lord Toranaga and makes a request of him. And it's very clear that she's not just there for what the reason that you think it is, that she's very politically aware that many of the powerful men come to her tea house, and whilst they're busy and afterwards, they talk when they're relaxed. So she has access to a lot of information. And then again, she's not suddenly going to pull out a sword and kill 500 men and run around and, yeah, she's the champion. Like, she doesn't need to do
Galadriel.
She's smart and she's clever and she can manipulate people with the information she has, and she knows the players and how it all works and the political landscape, and she can use that knowledge to her advantage, but she's still a madam that works in a tea house. So you can have characters in those roles and do interesting things with them. It's not to say you can't, but just going back to the basics again and just doing the same old, I just don't see the point. It just seems a bit ridiculous these days.
A bit lazy and boring.
It is. It's lazy and boring.
From the perspective of a writer and a reader, to me, it's just a bit boring.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, winding down, I want to ask you, in what ways do you think writing characters of the opposite gender has helped you to grow and develop as a writer and as a human being?
Oh, God. I don't know. I don't know if it's helped me grow as a human being. I think it's made me more aware, I think. I spending a lot of time with women, having lots of friends who are women, makes me more aware of modern society, how they are treated. But then if I am God in my own fantasy society, I can decide anything. I can change things that annoy me or upset me or bother me. Why do I need to start from the same place? I don't. Like you said, MJ, if it's second world fantasy and you've got dragons and elves and goblins and whatever else, why would women be the same as they are on Earth? It's not, back then, what with dragons and elves? Show me, go back to 13th century and show me the elves.
Wait, where was that?
I'll wait. It's like, it's made me more conscious of my bias, and I have to try and separate myself from that when I'm creating a fantasy world so that I don't, some stuff will always bleed through. But I think when you're a writer at the beginning, a lot of your stuff bleeds through anyway into character. On my first few novels that are trunk novels, people could say, oh, that's a bit of you, that's a bit of so-and-so, that's based on your friend. They can see it because you write what you know. It's only as you go a bit further down the path, there'll be aspects that you've picked up from other people that blend into things, but it's less kind of self-insertion, like, oh, the great hero, that's just you. Well, is it? Yes, it is. Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Younger Stephen, I'm such a hero.
The farm boy grows up to be, it's that kind of thing. It's that you just move, so you've got to evolve and grow away from all the things you know, and equally it's the same with writing women. You learn to have to separate 21st century women and prejudices and societies and structures and create something that doesn't, hopefully, show too much of yourself and your own way of thinking, because that can colour the reader's judgment, I think. Even like politics, religion, all these kind of things, you don't want to have them bleed through onto the page. And then you can write characters across the spectrum. You can have really religious and racist and homophobic characters, but you don't. But some readers will turn around and go, well, clearly the author is a racist, homophobic, sexist. And you're like, what about all the other characters who aren't that? So how does that work,
It's all about building your empathy and coming full circle. It's about spreading the love, people.
It's about listening as well.
It's about, listening is very, very important, which is why we thank you for listening to this podcast and this mini masterclass with Stephen. Thank you so much.
Great segue.
Flawless.
Wow.
Love that.
Wow. Like we planned it or something.
Right.
We got this shit. We're a dream team. I
This is
love it. All right. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for delving into this topic with us, for suggesting it, first of all. We're always appreciative to all the authors who come on the show for suggesting these topics, but for you, for being a little daring and going into this topic that is, it's a hot mess, but it's a fun time.
Important,
and I
love it. I think it was a great chat. Yeah.
Yeah. As well, for anyone who contributes to our Patreon at $5 or more each month, there's a reading by Stephen from The Blood Dim Tide. Good sir, where can folks find you online?
Check out my website, stephen-aryan.com. I'm on Instagram, my YouTube channel, lots of videos on there, lots of interviews with the authors, including these two here, and many others about writing. Those are the best places to find me.
Excellent. Go pick up Stephen's books. You got 10 to choose from. Something in there is going to tickle your fancy.
Buy all of them.
Newest one is, buy them all.
Get a whole
buy them all.
Stephen shelf.
Exactly.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Release an Aryan omnibus or something like that. All 10 books.
Just fills the shelf.
Do some bicep curls with Stephen's books.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. You can follow SFF Addicts on Instagram, Twitter, all that jazz at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can get your dose of mushrooms with Mushroom Blues, which is right there. MJ, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me across all the main socials at MJ Kuhn Books. You can just go to my website, mjkuhn.com, and you can buy my books to help feed my cat.
Support the Thorn Food Fund.
Support the Thorn Food Fund. He's a very hungry boy.
He's a hungry boy. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.